morning, everybody, and welcome to the Undergraduate Research Symposium here at the University of Oregon. We are so excited to have you with us and grateful that you have joined really what is an exciting and tremendous session, always on my mind. So we have 4 presentations today for you that are all going to be outstanding. We've got tremendous work done by these students, and we're excited to hear what they have learned and what they have been working on for research. So just in terms of some kind of quick overview of how today's session will go, you have the opportunity as a presentation is ongoing to pose questions to our presenters via the Q&A tool that should appear on the bottom of your screen. And know that, certainly while our presenters are presenting, they may not be able to get immediately to your question, but they can potentially do so via kind of a chat function when they're done with their presentation. And also we will be reserving time at the end for a larger group Q&A. So please feel free to post your questions while presentations are ongoing, but then also know that you have an opportunity when we get to the end of the 4th session that we'll be able to come back together as in a larger Q&A. All right, with that, let's get rolling. We will start off with Bianca Benitez and her presentation, Incorporating Qualitative Data into Parent Intervention Clinical Research Study. So Bianca, take it away.
Hello. Okay, sorry, I'm just gonna share my screen here. Okay, I may not be able to share my screen, but that's okay.
Well, we can. So you're saying. So I think we need to make you a co-host to.
Oh, I think.
Yes. Here we go. Now give that a try.
Okay.
Yeah. Great.
Okay. So good morning, everybody. My name is Bianca, and today I will be reviewing literature that reinforces why we need culturally adaptive parent intervention clinical research. Based on the studies I've gone over, there is a distinct difference between caregiving evaluation in families who speak English as their primary language versus families who speak Spanish as their primary language. Measures that are created with English-speaking families don't readily apply to Spanish-speaking families or how their caregiving will be evaluated. Incorporating culturally malleable methodology in parent intervention allows researchers to adjust their approaches and what they consider during the study when evaluating the caregiving of a Spanish-speaking family. The studies I will reference today will clearly portray why researchers need to incorporate a qualitative, culturally adapted approach when conducting their parent intervention clinical research in order to fairly evaluate caregiving of Spanish-speaking families. All of the articles chosen for this review have 3 characteristics in common. All of the studies reference work in parent intervention clinical research with English and Spanish-speaking families. All of the studies comment on abnormalities in caregiving evaluations between the English and Spanish-speaking families. And lastly, all of the studies proposed a qualitative approach in order to yield more valid data and more equal evaluations. I further categorized these studies based on their approaches to the challenges of transitioning English-speaking family cultivated measures onto Spanish-speaking families. Then I'll compare the methods to one another. So firstly, the method of entirely culturally adaptive studies and evidence-based interventions. The researchers involved in studies which sustained complicated caregiving evaluations decided to use what they call evidence-based interventions, or EBIs, in order to develop an entirely new approach to their study. An evidence-based intervention creates a standard by which certain targeted outcomes must be met in order to consider a study efficient. By overhauling the entire study to fit the cultural group of a Spanish-speaking family, various studies used evidence-based interventions in order to maintain validity and efficacy. A publication by Melanie M. Dominic and colleagues in 2009 for the Society for Community Research and Action cites a study being culturally adaptive from being used on English-speaking families in Oregon to Spanish-speaking families in Oregon in order to impact caregiving evaluation. The Oregon model of parent management training evaluated caregiving through stages and conceptualized parenting practices through positive and negative outcomes. Parenting practices of the Spanish-speaking families proved to portray cultural aspects of the family's behavior that did not have to be considered with English-speaking families, such as the effects of immigration. Because of this, researchers decided to implement several culturally adapted evidence-based intervention controlled trials to see if they would yield improved results. The model for their approaches of observing, recording, and coaching have produced favorable child outcomes and has been used in several different institutions of varying cultural groups. Dominic and her colleagues' model for recording, observing, and coaching has even been used internationally in countries such as Mexico. This this method of approach is challenging due to the fact that researchers are sort of personalizing measures to the families involved. In a study Professor Guillermo Bernal in 2006 conducted, he states that culture is a key aspect of family approaches, yet states that the role culture plays is difficult to document and difficult to tailor to the different kinds of families. Professor Bernal considers culture a special issue and believes that the usage of evidence-based intervention is not only effective, but has always had a place in clinical research. Another study, a 30-year program on family therapy and early development, which was initially created with English-speaking families, adapted specific cultural aspects of the Spanish-speaking families involved in their treatment. Through the utilization of the qualitative data, that is, the culture of the Spanish-speaking families, the study was able to document the culturally adapted approach as part of their treatment and document support for this model. A paper written by Felipe Gonzalez Castro and other authors from 2010 states that catering to the specific needs of a culturally adapted study is a lengthy process that can involve many aspects of culture. However, the increasing trends of evidence-based intervention alongside the increasingly diverse population of the United States means that there is a growing demand for these kinds of interventions. Castro and colleagues cite that several studies found that evidence-based interventions were more effective with minority children over white children. When comparing Spanish to English-speaking families, the increasing number of families involved in an entirely culturally adapted evidence-based intervention proved to be inconsistent, and not all data clearly portrayed the efficacy of these interventions. The statistical ability to support culturally adapted EBIs is unstable, yet standards have been created to address the data that is available, which indicates that culturally adapted EBIs are necessary to some degree. Another approach researchers have taken have been those surrounding cultural competency. Of the literature I've reviewed, cultural competency is an acknowledgement and understanding of the cultural group involved in the study. Though cultural competency can manifest in different ways, there's a lot of work on the individual researcher's part rather than the study itself. A study by M. Dominic and colleagues evaluated infant caregiving of Spanish-speaking families that was initially developed with English-speaking families and made note of the contrasting parenting styles in 2010. The original parenting styles and definitions established in the study with the English-speaking families did not apply as easily onto the Spanish-speaking families. There were parenting styles that overlapped in the Spanish-speaking homes that had not overlapped in English-speaking homes. Because of these inconsistencies in the measure, it suggested that researchers take into account the Spanish-speaking families' cultural background. The article progresses by stating that researchers' cultural competency was needed in order to make sound evaluations. The study brought in expert raters to evaluate behavior since they were considered culturally competent as members of the American Psychological Association for the Ethnic Minorities Division. Had the uncommon evaluation of the Spanish-speaking homes not been noticed, the overall evaluation of those families would have been invalid, especially when comparing them to the English-speaking homes. The study's solution for this was bringing in culturally competent researchers in order to evaluate behavior fairly. And this cultural competency was not something researchers could amass in a short period of time. Thus, they needed to look for outside sources in order to have a culturally competent member of their team. In comparison, the first method of culturally adaptive evidence-based interventions has data that proves the connection between data and methodology. Though not all statistical data clearly displays a trend of efficacy, there is enough data to make the connection. Cultural competence, on the other hand, is reliant upon members of the research team's knowledge and understanding of that cultural group that they are specifically working with. there's no clear data to evaluate that validity. Based on the fact that one method of approach has quantitative connections through the implementation of qualitative methodology, it's clearly the more impactful and superior method of approach. In order to have the most valid results from the clinical research, qualitative methodology must be incorporated. Culturally adaptive evidence-based interventions are the best methods for developing a study in which English and Spanish-speaking families can be evaluated fairly. Parent intervention in clinical research relies on data that can be skewed without the incorporation of qualitative data. Thus, when evaluating Spanish-speaking families with a measure made and developed with English-speaking families, it should be significant enough to incorporate qualitative, culturally adapted approaches, such as in the first instances I've referenced. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bianca. That's a very compelling study that you've been working on and observations that you've made. Really appreciate that. We have a couple of minutes now. If there are questions that we could, that are specifically for Bianca, and it looks like, Bianca, you've got a question in the Q&A prompt box there. So the question posed is, what does culturally adaptive approaches in parent intervention look like in practice? And can you provide a more specific ethnographic description of that term? Bianca, do you want to respond to that?
Sure, yes, of course. Thank you for the question, Katie. So the specific method of recording, observing, and coaching essentially means that, so for example, with the infant caregiving that I referenced, they would have the families, part of their trials, work together, and then they would record those instances, observe them, and evaluate them with the lab, with their team, and then come back to the families and give them their notes or give them any sort of advice or coaching, if you will, to improve or change the direction in which they are conducting their caregiving. Which is why if you don't consider that certain families are inherently going to be different culturally, you're always going to have a bit of a strange situation, because something that would seem far more normal for, let's say, a European family versus someone who lives in the South of the United States, just that alone is going to be so different that if you don't give the proper advice that is culturally competent and culturally aware, you're going to sort of create a strange family dynamic that wouldn't be present otherwise.
Do we have another minute? Is there another? Let's see. Let me note that there's a sort of follow-up question there from Barbara Ferran. Are you referring to hugging, for example? And then if we have time, I'll follow up with another little question.
So hugging is a funny example, but yes, it is. There are certainly certain demographics that hug and touch far more than other groups. So if you were to be dealing with a group that, let's say, doesn't hug as much, but you and your team made the entire measure with a cultural group that does hug, you might tell that family, hey, start hugging your child more because it's a warmer, better behavior. But realistically, it's not something that comes natural to that group and may even be strange and possibly hurt the dynamic in more ways than help them, because you're implementing a completely foreign notion to them and their subculture.
Nice. Jesse, I guess looking at the time, probably we should move. I can save a question for Q&A later. Is that the best timing, or should I ask a question now?
I think that we're actually okay right now. Craig.
Oh, okay, great. Well, yeah, I mean, great presentation, Bianca. It's really nicely and clearly done. I was curious if you would characterize, as a scholar, I'm always really interested in how much people are debating really different positions in a literature, as opposed to coming at a sort of technical or methodological issue together from different angles or with different resources. And so I'm wondering if would you characterize the sort of distinctive approaches between a cultural competence bunch and an EBI bunch as a real disagreement about how to tackle this problem? Or another possibility, it sounded to me a little bit like the culturally competent thing is actually a low resource. If you happen to have someone around who knows this population, you do that. and it's a lot less resources than investing, creating a whole study in an EBI way that's directed at this population. How would you see the literature you're looking at in that way?
So that is a very good point. It's interesting to see why they took the approaches that they did. I would say that why they decided to go with, for example, cultural competency versus an entirely adapted EBI is a bit up for debate, but it does seem that in the literature I've reviewed, it is a bit of an argument over what is better suited, what makes more sense for the process of the study, as well as what is the most cost effective, because, you know, that's something that has to be considered. So I would say that it is slightly, you know, it is a bit of a debate, but at the end, I think the attempt is to find the one that is the most culturally encompassing for their groups, because at the end of the day, if your information isn't valid, doesn't really matter how much you spent on it.
True enough. Great answer.
Thank you, Bianca. Much appreciated. And you know, your research topic here actually takes me back to my days in graduate school as well. And so you've got my wheels turning in exciting ways. So thank you for doing that for all of us today. We're going to move to our second presentation now, and Desiree Casanova will present on finding a correlation between adolescent drug abuse and adult memory recall deficits. Desiree.
And I've just made you co-host, Desiree.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Let me get my screen up here. Here we are. Okay. Hello, my name is Desiree Casanova, and I'm a senior here at the University of Oregon. And today I will be presenting on the possible memory recall deficits in adulthood who abuse drugs in their adolescence. So my study aims to investigate the hypothesis that adolescent drug abuse is positively correlated with deficits in memory recall later in life and adulthood. We're aiming to study the potential long-term cognitive deficits that's influenced by adolescent drug abuse by utilizing individual perception of memory recall skills to find these possible deficits. And we're also trying to build on previous research. So before we dive too far in, some definitions for you guys. When I mean the term adolescence, we're looking at the time frame between the ages of 12 to 17 years old. So, because we're not actually studying adolescents in this adolescent time frame, we are studying adults here, but we're looking at the time of use between this age range. So to define memory recall, this is the process of successfully being able to retrieve information that was previously learned, experienced, or obtained, and reiterate that information to other people. So we're looking at memory recall skills. We're not looking at any other types of memory. You know, this is our specific domain that we're going to be talking about throughout this presentation. And then for a quick definition of drug abuse, this is the compulsive act to use either a singular psychoactive substance or multiple psychoactive substances that are impacting your life in a negative manner. So why do we care about this? Well, this research is relevant because it shows the long-term cognitive deficits that are influenced by drug abuse in adolescents. And we're utilizing memory recall as the basis of this study, so we can show how using drugs in early life may affect later adulthood. So as far as what's been done before, there is currently no available research that I was at least able to find that's looking at these two very specific domains. However, there is a significant amount of research that's looking at short-term effects as well as other cognitive deficits. So to give you guys some information on that, some of the previous research that's been done is in consideration for memory recall is that there are some associations between alcohol abuse disorder in adolescents and recognition memory deficits. Again, not quite the domain that we're looking at, but pretty close. Animal studies also show that amphetamines during adolescence induce deficits in learning and memory, including visual discrimination, reversal learning, and spatial working memory in adulthood. So there's also been some animal studies that have been done within, kind of close within these domains, but we're still not quite there yet. To continue with these thoughts, substances such as alcohol, cannabis, and stimulants such as cocaine and amphetamines have shown to disrupt the processes of the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for planning complex behaviors, personality expression, and decision-making skills. And the metabolic dopamine pathways are also being modified here, which is modifying reward systems, socio-emotional processes, and cognition skills. Other evidence shows that drug consumption during adolescence can produce a large variety of different effects that have been seen in adult drug abusers. So adversely affecting behavioral, neural, and cognitive functions, even long after early life exposure and recovery has happened. So the hypothesis in my study is individuals who indicate having experienced high levels of drug abuse during their adolescence will also indicate having worse memory recall skills later in adulthood. And I predict that the individuals who have struggled with drug addiction in adolescence will have a worsened perception of their memory recall, and that they will feel probably generally worse about their memory recall skills than those who hadn't experienced drug addiction. So the methods of this study is an open online survey. I really want to make this accessible to as many people as possible. First, they will go through an informed consent, making sure that they are completely aware of what this study is studying and what we're using it for. There's going to be about 37 questions in total. So our first 15 questions is going to be all around drug history, and then we're going to go into the memory recall questions, and finally we will ask some questions about the demographics. These individuals are to remain completely anonymous. There's no reason to know who these individuals are. That's not really the purpose of this study, but there will be some debriefing information afterwards so that they understand the purposes of this study. So we're really looking at any person over the age of 18 who is willing to take this study. There's no requirements for having previously experienced drug abuse or experimentation of any description. So some of the questions that we're looking at here, first we're going to be looking at our memory recall. The reason that we're looking at the questions that in this way, we're really asking I-directed questions. So we want individuals to really be reflecting on their own memory recall skills. So some of the question examples I have here are, I struggled to remember yesterday's events. I can remember events from my childhood very well. I forget things easily. I can study and remember information for a test with ease. And I have a hard time remembering people's names. So again, we're really trying to get our participants to reflect on their own memory recall skills and how they feel about them and how well they're able to remember information and then reflect that information to other people. Sorry, excuse me. Next, we have our drug experience questions. Again, we're really trying to get people to reflect on these experiences. So some examples are, I have never taken an illicit substance before the age of 18. I was exposed to drugs by my family. Before the age of 18, I used drugs often. I have only used an illicit substance a few times before the age of 18. Using illicit substances have made a significant negative impact in my life. So here we're really looking to gather information on their drug abuse before the age of 18. Information after that is really not relevant for the purposes of this study. And after these sets of questions, we're really looking to gather some demographics about the individuals that are participating. This is really important to gather information about the populations in which adolescent drug exposure is taking place. It's also really important to understand if certain genders or ethnicities are at greater risk for memory recall deficits due to having past drug exposure. And does having more education or income affect exposure or these deficits? So the expected results of this study is to be congruent with the presented hypothesis. Those who report more drug exposure during their adolescence will also report worse memory perception. Results will also show that those at a greater disadvantage socioeconomically will have had more drug exposure and worsened memory recall skills. And this is kind of congruent with the fact that we'll have social media participants as well as college student participants. And it's likely that social media participants will have had a greater drug exposure and greater perceived deficits in memory recall than the college students will. So next step for this is I really hope to be able to collect and analyze this data, review and publish my results, and carry on this research in a graduate school program as more of a longitudinal study where hopefully I'll actually be able to follow individuals over a long period of time, testing and retesting their memory recall skills after having stopped their drug exposures. So far, I've only been able to complete my literature review, the IRB approval, and working on the IRB approval, building this survey, and starting to connect some outreach and really get this research out there. But for now, that's all I have for you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Desiree. And just a reminder to the folks that are viewing our webinar, you are welcome to submit questions now, as well as when we get through all 4 presentations. We do have a couple minutes right now, Desiree, and so as we give folks a chance to fire off any questions they might have, do you mind taking a second and maybe sharing a little bit about what drew you to this line of research?
Yeah, something that drew me to this line of research has a lot to do with my own personal experiences. You know, being exposed to individuals suffering from drug addiction early on in life and watching how those addictions really affected them later on throughout the years, even long-term after exposure was already done, you know. And I have a greater interest in adolescents because I'm really looking to find out, how does our brain heal? How is introducing these psychoactive drugs into the brain at this really critical developmental period affecting us later in life? And how can we use this information to continue to develop early intervention systems so these vulnerable adolescents are more aware of the consequences of drugs and drug abuse specifically later on in life?
Thank you. Bianca, please go ahead and jump in right now.
Terribly sorry, it wasn't letting me type anything. First off, Desiree, incredibly fascinating. I think it's so interesting. I don't know if you're looking into this, but by any chance, are you recording or studying whether or not the kind of illicit drug being taken does less or more damage, or is it just across the scale if you're taking illicit drug use and then seeing the impact that it has?
Great question. So right now I'm really just looking at everything across the board. So what kind of drugs are being used is not specifically relevant within this kind of study. You know, I'm more looking at drug abuse as a whole. So regardless of what drug you're using, is there something happening later on in life? You know, hopefully once I get into a graduate school program, I can kind of broaden my horizons and maybe even narrow down this research into a specific substance. But for now, I'm not really looking at that. Great question though, thank you.
How about if I jump in with a question? Great presentation and really interesting research, Desiree. So I'm wondering, and it's cool to see you thinking, you know, picturing sort of expanding this research in a grad school program, and I understand you're at the beginnings of this. I was wondering if you have thought about in this first stage, it may be that so you can't actually do testing of these people's memories, right? That's too elaborate. You're asking them about their perceptions of their memory recall as opposed to testing their memory recall. I can see why
Right.
that would be a whole lot easier to do. But that does raise the complexity, the challenge of, are there other sources of variation in their perceptions of their memories that are not actually measuring variation in their memory recall itself? And I wondered, so I don't know anything about this space at all. I'm a political scientist. But it seems to me some people say with higher self-esteem, might just give a more positive account of their memory recall, whether or not they can actually remember anybody's names. And you might then, there might be some endogeneity in the process where either people who fall into drug abuse have lower self-esteem to begin with, or as a consequence of drug abuse, they have lower self-esteem, and then report problems with things like memory or otherwise, even if it's not totally clear that their memories have suffered.
Right.
So yeah.
There's definitely a lot of challenges within this field of research. You know, I think that has a lot to do with why these domains haven't really been studied super hard and why we haven't moved into human subjects. And so where I'm at right now is really just the most bare bones. You know, this is just the beginning to start opening the doors to more questions to be answered. So yeah, there are some limitations for sure within this study that are relevant and important to be discussed. But I also really believe that it's important to start connecting those dots. You know, so I think we're starting with good things.
That makes tons of sense to me. You got to bite off what you can to begin with. You might, though, you know, there might be some questions you could stick alongside in your survey that could conceivably speak, you know, control a tiny bit for other such things. Just a thought.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sure.
Desiree, thank you so much. I love the intersection of multiple disciplines. I mean, I hear very clearly the biology and the sociology like coming together in ways that are exciting to inform this work. So thank you. Wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, up next we have a group of presenters. And so we've got Skyler Cservak, Mollie Markey, Brianna Burrell-Lewis, and Sierra Rains, who will be presenting on restoring connections, reconnecting young minds to place in a virtual setting. So team, take it away.
And whom should I make co-host to? Oh, it looks like Skyler already is. Okay. Looks like you're good, Skyler.
Yeah, I'm all good. And I apologize. I'm fighting a leaf blower right now. But anyways, good morning, everybody. We are Restoring Connections, which is part of the Environmental Leadership Program at the University of Oregon. And just to repeat our title is Restoring Connections, Connecting Young Minds to Place in a Virtual Setting. So before we get into our presentation, we want to all acknowledge that all outdoor education takes place on Indigenous homelands. Today and every day, we give thanks to the Kalapuya people who have cared for these lands since time immemorial and who continue to live in and care for communities across Oregon and beyond. I also want to take a second to introduce some of us. My name is Skyler, but my nature name is Crabapple. And I also have with me today, Moss, Blossom, and Starling. While only 4 of us are presenting, Restoring Connections is made up of a total of 8 students from the university. However, we're also comprised of community partners, students, teachers, and more. And speaking of our community partners, we also want to take a second to recognize our community partners, Mount Pisgah Arboretum, the University of Oregon, Adams Elementary School. These partnerships have provided support and guidance through this past quarter as we immersed ourselves into the world of environmental education. So there were so many things that COVID changed for us, and as well as adapting 2 new people to the group after learning how to develop curriculum in NVS 425 and 525. This was a change we took on and managed successfully due to availability for each other, online communication, and all around organized materials. All of our work that we did was still tied to required readings like the North American Association for Environmental Education Guidelines and the Coyote's Guide to Connecting with Nature. And we still continued our development of materials in NVS 429, where we actually taught these materials. So something that we created together for the students was a field notebook. Each student was given a field notebook specifically created for their grade level and their lessons. Each page is designed to help us assess our application of the lessons we designed and to help gauge each student's engagement and understanding of the material. It is also used to help guide the students through the lessons and give them space for them to write their thoughts and ideas. Additionally, as a resource for them to go back and reflect on what they have learned. So all of these materials and resources that we use are with the intention to achieve our mission statement, which is to develop a place-based experiential environmental education program that cultivates a lasting relationship to the land based in reciprocity and respect. By maintaining continuity in all of our educational materials, instilling curiosity in students from our activities, and creating connections with not only our students and each other, but to the natural world, we plan to encourage a lasting sense of stewardship towards their local environment. So with that in mind, I'm going to pass it off to Moss.
Thank you, Crabapple. I'm going to be talking about the series sequence. So each grade level had a different core theme that their lessons revolved around, and these lessons were developed by different members of our team. On top of the lessons, we also gave the students bonus activities or eco challenges to encourage making connections to nature outside of the classes. So the theme for kindergarten was sensory awareness. In the first lesson, they were introduced to the incense cedar forest, which is the focal habitat for their grade. In the second lesson, kindergartners were taught to identify the difference between predators and prey, and they learned how to use their animal forms like deer ears for deeper listening and owl eyes to practice peripheral vision to gain nature awareness skills. In the third lesson, kindergartners were introduced to sit spots, another core routine which students observe more in nature and to find ways to thoughtfully and respectfully observe nature. In the fourth lesson, by virtually tracking the rough-skinned newt at the Mount Pisgah Arboretum, kindergartners explored all of the tools they can use to track animals outside. And lastly, in the fifth lesson, kinders were able to implement all 4 elements necessary to have a habitat to design and create their own fairy houses. So as you can see, as part of the kindergarten species spotlight on rough-skinned newts, students were asked to color in a rough-skinned newt and draw its habitat. This activity targeted students' observation skills, assessed their understanding of a newt's habitat, and gave them a chance to practice cataloging wildlife in their field notebooks. So another activity in the kindergarten class was to design a fairy house. This was used to help students understand the 4 factors of a habitat, which are water, food, shelter, and space. After they planned their house, they were invited to build their design with materials found in nature that are already on the ground, so branches and fallen leaves. The theme for the first graders was it's all about the seasons. So in the first lesson, first graders were introduced to the oak woodlands, which is the focal habitat for their grade. In the second lesson, first graders were taught to identify key differences between predators and prey and how to use those animal forms to provide nature awareness skills. In the third lesson, first graders were reminded of sit spots and once again were given ways to thoughtfully and respectfully observe nature. The fourth lesson was also a species spotlight, and first graders learned all about the turkey vulture and migratory scavenger birds. Finally, in the fifth lesson, first graders participated in an eco-trivia activity and used clues and observation skills to identify the focal species they learned about throughout the program. So as you can see, for the first graders' last eco challenge, we asked them to collect fallen petals and leaves and grass, more things that we can just find on the ground in nature. We then asked them to draw a picture of their face and add those pieces of nature as their hair, so they could literally see themselves in nature. We called these their nature self-portraits, and here are some of the submissions that we received. Finally, for the second graders, the theme was life at every level. So in the first lesson, second graders focused on the web of interconnectedness and learned all about food webs. The second lesson was titled Mystery Species and introduced second graders to the focal species for their grade. And the third lesson, second graders were introduced to symbiosis and all of the different kinds of relationships that we can find in the forest. In the fourth lesson, second graders were taught about the importance of biodiversity. And finally, the fifth lesson focused on the season of wildflowers, and second graders learned to understand the difference between native and non-native species. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Blossom.
Thanks, Moss. So today I'll be talking about our learning outcomes, which varied by short, medium, and long term. And so for our short-term learning outcomes, they were defined as measuring connections and environmental literacy. We measured the students' connections with nature by assessing how many students were able to engage with their environment. And this was by either attempting an eco-challenge or asking for their recent nature stories. Environmental literacy was measured by students' retention of new vocabulary about local ecology taught in our weekly lessons. And so the medium-term learning outcomes were defined as environmental stewardship and personal development. Stewardship was measured through the awareness to actions taken by students to preserve Mount Pisgah Arboretum and new behaviors they take to restore or care for their local environment. Personal development was measured through the students' willingness to participate and apply their eco-challenges, bonus activities, and core routines outside of class. And so in this slide, you can see this is an example of personal development. As we can see students practicing nature awareness. Students are observing in a group. They're using those animal forms, so you can see those deer ears. And then and to the right, you can see a student participating in a sit squat. And so lastly, we have our long-term outcome, which is to maintain connections. This aims to protect the wildlife and ecology of Mount Pisgah Arboretum while amplifying and maintaining connections to Kalapuya homelands. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Sterling.
Thank you, Blossom. So now we're going to be moving into the conclusion of our presentation. And so in this section, we'd really like to focus on the impact of our program on the lives of students and teachers and on the growth that we personally have experienced in the Restoring Connections team through this leadership opportunity. So rather than telling you how students felt, we thought that we would let them tell you. So some memorable quotes from students are, I really love learning about nature and flowers. I picked nature as my nature name because I can't pick just one thing in nature that I love. Fairy houses are my favorite thing. I want to see if my mom can take me outside every day. This was really fun and I liked everything and I want to learn more about everything. So you can see by these quotes that students got a lot out of the program. Zoom schooling has been particularly draining on young kids, but these moments showed real engagement among our students and that, that students were motivated and excited to explore their local ecology with us. So you can see on this slide some of that excitement in action. As one of our bonus activities, we encouraged students to learn all about Migratory Bird Day and provided them with a coloring sheet and an opportunity to connect with the Eugene Raptor Center. So we also included like a brief story for some additional learning. And since our first grade focal species, the turkey vulture, is a migratory bird, we really wanted to get them excited about World Migratory Bird Day. And so these are just a few examples of students' finished coloring pages, which showcase their participation online and at home, as some were completed in person and some were completed virtually. And the fact that so many students were excited to participate in a bonus activity tells us that they were eager to learn outside of the classroom and that our program had inspired them to learn on their own. And so here we've also incorporated some feedback from cooperating teachers. So teachers have said, like, you humans rock, couldn't have asked for a better experience. Your lesson yesterday was fantastic. Love how you adapted the trip to online. And I'm so impressed with your whole team. Kids stay on in class just to learn with you. And so these quotes have meant a great deal to us as a team as we take feedback from teachers and program leaders very seriously. And we hope that they showcase the importance of outdoor education, even if it was virtual, towards students' learning experiences. And so throughout the program, there were a lot of different obstacles to overcome, and we always worked as a group to get past them. Our team is very proud of the work that we've done, but accomplishments that we'd like to highlight are that we created an inclusive virtual learning environment and overcame many technical difficulties. We adapted to the needs of many different types of learners, and we partnered really closely with teachers and community partners. We designed 5 weeks of lessons for kindergartners, first and second graders, and we developed our personal and professional skills. So we gained a great deal of experience practicing leadership and teamwork and communication and classroom management and lesson plan development. And we're confident that these skills will follow us beyond the program and are grateful to have had the space to practice them as a team. And so finally, we would like to just acknowledge really quickly and thank everyone who contributed to the program. Restoring Connections wouldn't be possible without the support of all of these wonderful people and organizations that we have listed on this slide. So thank you to everybody who was involved. And with that, that's our presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Restoring Connections team. Very exciting. I definitely think that the sit spot notion should be part of our everyday practice for all of us, not just the children in our community. So thank you for that great reminder. And many other reminders in the presentation. We do have one question at this point in the Q&A, and really a question on clarification. So how did you handle connecting students to nature, especially forming that emotional connection and curiosity when lessons were done over Zoom?
I can take that one. Yeah, so that was kind of the whole point of the program, right? Was to get kids feeling emotionally connected to nature over Zoom. It was a pretty big challenge, but what we did is we really tried to make it personal and super accessible to them. So, you know, always making nature something that they could experience right outside their front door. So yes, we were trying to get them involved in the ecology at Mount Pisgah Arboretum, and we were really talking about species there to get them excited to go to Mount Pisgah and try to explore on their own. But more than anything, our eco challenges were a really great way for us to introduce students to going outside and actually building that connection in their personal lives, and you know, exploring the different trees that were out in their front yard or observing different species that were just around them. So it was about making it something that they could do at home, as well as, you know, going out and actually going to the Arboretum and experiencing it in person.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Craig.
Oh, I see. We have another question from Katie Lynch, asking you to talk a little bit about how you integrated science standards or how you used activities to inspire a love for science.
I can take this one, I guess. So we used the science standards, and we had specific standards for each grade that kind of coincided with those themes that we talked about. And the way we really did it is we tried to use like observation skills, which is the first step of the scientific process, and really just trying to encourage like a love of these observations and nature. And we also used phrases like scientist hats or scientist brains or big scientist words as ways to get kids excited about the learning.
Great. And do we have time for one more little question, Jesse? Does that sound all right? Okay. I just want to throw out, I mean, I love the project you've put together. I wish my kids were not all a little too old to have gone through it. And I wondered what, now, and this may be too big a question to answer very well in this time, but to what degree, or what did you think was most distinctive about this curricular material that you were offering to these classes and these teachers? I mean, there's surely a bunch of things out there in this space. And I wonder how the team thought about, you know, what niche you were most inserting yourself into that was bringing something to teachers that didn't already in some way have access to.
Yeah, I don't mind taking this. So I think the thing that we're trying to instill the most was the connection to place, and just sort of having a more integrated transdisciplinary material that we're able to offer for teachers that isn't just it isn't just for Adams Elementary School. These materials are also available online for multiple teachers. However, they are connected to Calapooya lands at the Mount Pisgah Arboretum. So that is definitely unique to this program. However, having accessible materials that also integrate like reading skills, writing skills, observational skills, I think that was definitely something that teachers, especially in like Zoom land, teachers are really wanting, something that's fun and something that students can really connect to and really just have fun with. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That seems really compelling to me. It's great. It's such a great project.
Brianna, I just want to be sure we give you a chance. I saw that you had taken your mute button off. Did you want to weigh in on that last question?
Oh no, I think Skyler pretty much nailed it. But yeah, no, these students were definitely grasped onto our program just because science is very fun for everyone. So
wonderful. Thank you to the Restoring Connections team. Appreciate that very insightful and fun and great reminder for us presentation too. So our concluding presentation in this session of Always on My Mind will be from Kat Luna, and it's timely. The session or the presentation title is Pick Me Up, a study on time management and non-traditional students with children during COVID. Kat, take it away.
Thank you so much. Let me see if I can do this properly, sharing my screen. These Zoom things are so strange. So hopefully you guys can see that. Are we good? Wonderful. I am Kat Luna, and today I'm going to present to you about non-traditional students with children and their time management during COVID-19. And so the purpose of this research is to kind of look at how COVID-19 and the stay-at-home pandemic order has impacted University of Oregon undergraduate students and their time management behavior, and just looking at some of the differences between that behavior in those student populations. So a little bit of background on why I really want to present to you this research and why it's important to me is that I've had the honor and opportunity to direct the Non-Traditional Student Union this whole last year. And for the last 3 years after I transferred to University of Oregon, I've been able to work for the Non-Traditional Student Program through the Office of the Dean of Students and really see how amazing these very resilient students are in their ability to really manage a lot of challenges in life. So it's near and dear to my heart, and I'm also a non-traditional student as well. So yeah, keep going here. So I just kind of last minute did a quick search on how student populations were represented visually. I just went to like a photo, kind of stock website just to look at how different students are portrayed. And so if you can kind of look at to the left, some of these students are kind of like, student parents. And this is like how a lot of, I just did an actual search of like parenting students or parents with children in school. And then I actually just did a undergraduates, I think, search. And you can see the difference is really, really kind of stark. Like a lot of the, experiences of these students on the right here are quite different than the students on the left here. And so I just kind of wanted you to take a moment to look at the images and imagine how the learning environment is different once that stay-at-home order kind of went into place and these school closures happened. And then think about maybe your own experiences with your own time management behaviors and how that might have changed during COVID-19. So a little introduction. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, universities that participate in federal aid programs are required by the government to report information on traditional students only, which are classified as under the age of 24 and pursuing a degree for the first time. So this means that we don't have reliable data on 65% of college students, including student parents. And that's data based on students having at least one of the 7 characteristics of being non-traditional, which I'll talk about in a moment. So traditional undergraduate students are categorized as students under the age of 24 who have continued past high school without an extended break in their education. And so for all individuals, adjusting to changes within their lifetime is common practice throughout their development. We all go through it. We all take on the many complex roles and responsibilities that as we age into adulthood. And so students in higher education adjust in similar ways in order to become successful in earning their degree. So keeping pace with the changes within our lives requires attention to the situations in which we experience. And so that forces us to either shift or change with the, things that we all experience, or we can fight against it. And so for individuals who experience periods of learning, working, maybe long-term domestic partnerships, caregiving, or even unemployment, for example, they've developed a degree of resiliency, and they've acquired the ability to adjust to each situation as their life and circumstances change, whether they like it or not. These tend to be recurrent cycles in the lives of every individual, and with the opportunity for growth and learning at every single transition within our lives. The changes and shifts within an individual's life can help prepare them for a lot of the responsibilities that come with maintaining a functional and healthy lifestyle as they age. So the criteria of age seems to play the biggest role in defining non-traditional students, with an emphasis being placed on that life experience and that ability to kind of shift and change depending on their experience. According to the US Department of Education, non-traditional students meet one of 7 characteristics. There's a delayed enrollment into post-secondary education, attends college part-time, works full-time, is financially independent for financial aid purposes, has dependents other than a spouse, is a single parent, or does not have a high school diploma. So non-traditional student parents are just, non-traditional students with children, and they have even more complex challenges that can impact learning and academic success. So when we talk about the differences between these student populations, we can kind of begin to see how any lifestyle or major like environmental change can really impact these students in different ways, including their academic success and their ability to complete their coursework, and even their ability to complete their degree. So, the growing population of non-trads, you can see in non-traditional student parents, really has taken shape with the increases in the demand for more, specialized and professional training within careers. And many adults are returning to school because of that. So with adults competing for higher paid professional positions, the increases in housing costs, which we all are probably familiar with, and continual competition for economic growth, it's really no wonder that this student population is growing as rapidly as it is. And this slide really demonstrates it, that it is the fastest growing group of undergraduates in North America. So something to keep in mind. So when you go back to that image at the beginning of these experiences, you think about what has COVID-19 changed, and it really has changed everything. This slide just I wanted to throw it in there, even though it's super obvious, but it really has impacted everything. So why really should we care about that? I mean, obviously we've had to adjust and change, each of us individually, but in the bigger picture, these student populations' well-being is impacted. There really is limited flexibility of their schedules in how they have to adjust. There's an underrepresentation on college campuses, as we kind of touched on that, about how these demographics and the information is collected. And just kind of maybe as a result, there may be a limitation of resources like childcare services. Kind of touching on role tension, a lot of these students have to shift in and out of different roles, whether they're a student, a parent, maybe an employee, a partner, a friend, or whatever, maybe a caregiver for an elderly parent. So there's a lot of tension within those roles to have to shift in and out. Lots of conflicts in scheduling. There are lower retention rates that are due to these changes. Negative impacts on traditional gender roles. So females feel a lot more of the impact of these changes. And then there's also a lot more barriers for single parents who have to take on these challenges alone. And then lower rates of degree completion with parents dropping out. And then overall lower GPAs because they're having to really kind of balance that work, maybe, parenting and student life. So in some previous research, in 2006, researchers Quimby and O'Brien evaluated predictors of well-being of female college students with children. And participants in the study reported challenges of balancing personal life and relationships with academic tasks, emphasizing the demanding aspects of these factors having a potential negative effect on their well-being. So results showed that higher levels of social support were predictors of academic success. And this study really contributes to the idea that balancing multiple tasks can play a part in the student-parent academic success, with a higher likelihood of negative external factors contributing to the distress of that individual. In another research study, and perhaps one of the kind of greatest challenges that parenting students are facing during COVID-19 are limited environments in which they can isolate themselves and focus to complete assignments. With college campuses as well as K through 12 schools remaining closed and limiting on-site learning, parenting students with young children are impacted more compared to traditional students, with their attention to focus being divided among their academic responsibilities and their children's academic responsibilities, their role as a caregiver, and other demands within their personal lives and relationships. In a review on women returning to school, researchers examined the challenges that mothers face in balancing family responsibilities and academic success, reporting that female parenting students struggle with feelings of guilt and conflict when juggling school and being a parent compared to male parenting students. And the expectations placed upon parenting students to maintain academic performance standards can account for some of the attrition rates increasing within higher education, forcing a lot of the parenting students to choose between maintaining a higher level of performance within their role as a mother or father versus their role as a student. And I just want to go back. This is actually a sign that I had to post up on one of my doors for my own children because I had a final and I was like, I swear, do not knock on this door. So another research study just showed some impact on the student population. And just with our society seeing a significant change in the number of women entering the workforce, consistent gender expectations being placed on mothers doesn't give much space to deviate within the role, and they're limited from this kind of social ideology of the good mother, one that's caring, nurturing, patient, and available to her children. The increase of mothers working to support their families and feeling the consistent level of parental role performance is a steady societal expectation that can place even more pressure onto female parenting students within higher education. So these additional responsibilities, such as tasks relating to work, tend to become prioritized due to financial strain and limited resources for low-income students. So the necessity of working to maintain basic needs like food or housing and healthcare can place even more pressure on non-traditional students and their success in completing a degree. And many working students who rely on income from jobs that have been lost due to the COVID-19 policy changes have suffered disproportionately in their ability to maintain academic success. Also, parenting students, specifically single parents in college, have significant barriers to degree completion, kind of alluded to that, and they often face major stressors involved in that. So if you look at parenting students who are struggling to get their basic needs met, they really are impacted in such a negative way compared to other student populations. And in a recent study conducted by the Hope College Center for College Community and Justice, researchers examined survey responses from 23,000 parenting students about basic needs and security, with recommendations to offer resources on college campuses and to help just increase student retention rates to help these folks out. So my preliminary hypothesis in this is based on just some of the existing literature, and that there will be differences in time management behaviors when comparing student populations, specifically when measuring the ability to prioritize and set goals. I also hypothesize that students who manage multiple responsibilities and life roles while attending college will have increased abilities in undertaking additional time management responsibilities outside of their role as a student. This might seem a little obvious, but I could be totally wrong, which is one of the more humbling aspects of using quantitative data. So my methodology in this will be sampling student populations by collecting data through Qualitative surveys and using students from the University of Oregon. So the survey will include basic demographic information, so that way we can kind of look at the differences between non-traditional versus traditional, or if students have children. And the survey will include time management, the time management questionnaire, which will break down 3 areas of time management: short-term planning, time attitudes, and long-term planning. So some of the short-term planning questions, an example may be like, do you spend time each day planning? Maybe do you plan your day from start to finish, or do you plan your day before you even start it? Some of the time attitudes will include questions like, do you make constructive use of your time, or do you feel you're in charge of your time by and large? And then long-term planning would include questions like, do you have set goals for the entire term, or do you regularly review class notes even when a test is not imminent? So my results of this, we don't know yet. My IRB is pending approval, so we'll have to see. And I'm really, really excited about my results. They might indicate that non-traditional students and students with children are better at recognizing and establishing goals, as well as putting mechanisms into place to better accomplish goals like creating to-do lists or making and maintaining schedules, but who knows? COVID-19 really has just changed so much about our lives, including our time management. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Some of the limitations of this study, results in it will be based on self-report data only and may not show reliable or valid instruments in which time management skills are utilized. So like calendars, digital applications, reminders, alarms, things like that. And further attention on a lot of the mechanisms of time management, so like making to-do lists, keeping schedules, could provide more transparency to the efficiency of students' time management behaviors. And changes in time management behaviors could depend on course demands. So multiple surveys throughout one academic year might really help patterns and behavior rather than just a one-time survey. And I mean, everything is changing so quickly during COVID. It really just depends, and it could look so much different depending on the term and course load. The implications, this study contributes to the literature on the overall academic experience of undergrads and non-traditional students and also parenting students. Hopefully it'll contribute to changes in resources to offer a more inclusive and equitable experience for the many different types of students that attend universities. The research could lead to creating better policy and accommodations for parents, parenting students who are experiencing conflicts with schedules, focus, and parental responsibilities that may prevent them from attending synchronous or on-campus classes. And I hope that the research brings more transparency to some of the stigmas that might exist around adult learners and really help the degree of ageism that exists on campuses. So that's my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Kat, thank you so much. Definitely enjoyed it, and it's provided lots of food for thought. And so as we give folks a chance to pose any questions in the Q&A, I just wanted to lead with a question for you, and that's kind of the potential application for this kind of line of research and inquiry. What's your sense on what universities can be doing right now to support our non-traditional students that are parents, and whether it's related specifically to time management support and that kind of thing, or others related to student success as an undergraduate in general?
Yeah, that's a great question, and then really important for just equity in general. My personal experience at University of Oregon, I can't speak for other universities because they may be implementing some of these kind of maybe interventions, but I think one thing to really look at is maybe language, inclusive language in faculty training, and just teaching faculty how to be sensitive about parenting students and being able to recognize that maybe some of the participation, and especially during Zoom classes and things, so parents, parenting students with children who may have limitations and being able to really focus and be present during live Zoom courses, maybe being able to offer, maybe a different participation points, and maybe not having like such a heavy weight on the grade for some of those parenting students who can't attend live Zoom. And then also, I know that the AEC doesn't recognize parenting as a disability, and that it sounds absurd to even think that it would be recognized as a disability, but to be able to qualify for accommodations for certain things like maybe extra testing time. I mean, that note on the door was a real thing, and I did get interrupted during that. And I've talked to lots of parenting students on campus during COVID, that they have similar challenges in timed exams being really a challenge, and it can really impact their ability to be successful. So I think just a couple of those things, just being aware and just being flexible for students.
Thank you. Very thoughtful responses.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Maybe I'll throw out a question while we're see if maybe other questions will get tossed out in the Q&A. But yeah, really interesting. And you know, I mean, I have 3 children and can relate strongly to this experience of the pandemic. Even if I'm on the other side of the desk in these university relationships, still struggling with a lot of those things. I'm just curious. So I'm also in the process of beginning to design a survey for some of my own research, and I'm painfully conscious that surveys, in order to get good response rates, they can't be infinitely long, right? But with that as a lead-in, I'm curious. It seems like there's so many things that you could ask about the possible, you know, what people's conditions are like at home in particular. That could be relevant to this. I mean, so it's obviously hugely gendered, and clearly you're going to be asking questions about that. But so for me, like a personal experience, we are fortunate to have a pretty big house, right? And so with 3 kids and 2 working people in it, just the ability to have a little bit of separation of space has been crucial to our small level of sanity. Now, you can get at that with socioeconomic questions. That's going to correlate to a certain degree with wealth. Although there's going to be some variation there. I wonder if you're thinking about asking, like, how big is your place? Maybe questions about what people are studying. I wonder how much variation there would be. You know, since different majors, different courses of study make claims on your time in different ways. And I wondered if you could just play with that a little bit. What are the kinds of things beyond sort of really obvious gender, socioeconomic status that you might be trying to dig out when you ask people about how the crisis has affected them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are really good points, in that, you know, really environment plays a huge, huge part. I mean, even just going back to, you know, the group before me, and that ability to get kids outside and be able to get them occupied and really experience, it has a huge difference on, you know, being able to have that space and proximity can definitely have an impact on not just the focus, but I think just overall well-being. I mean, I think people do well when they have time to decompress and process what they're learning, as opposed to just jumping right into the next thing. And so, yeah, those are definitely questions that I'll be looking at, and I'll be adding a couple variables in just continuing this research in that well-being and stress, and the way that that's impacted by that environment will look. So I see Sierra's hand is raised, so I didn't know if I'm moderating or not, but go ahead, Sierra.
Thanks. So I guess I have a similar question for you. I was curious about how you've considered intersectional identities in your study. So like how ability and race and sexual orientation and different sort of factors like that incorporate into like the experience of a parent and the kind of like mental load that they're already carrying.
Yeah, absolutely. There's there was actually a really interesting concept in during my research. I was looking at this concept that was termed other mothering or brother mothering, and it's the concept of children being parentified within lower SES family dynamics, where maybe their parents are, you know, having to go outside of the home and work while they're in the home taking care of their siblings, and how that kind of like generational impact really plays into the way that the parents are able to kind of deliver I guess a higher level of parenting. And so, yeah, absolutely. There's definitely like income would impact that tremendously, and also just, you know, underrepresented and marginalized populations of groups who have, you know, suffered disproportionately from the wealth gap, and a lot of different factors that play in. I think just I mean, there's a lot to go in that, and I don't want to get too much in that, but yes, definitely would, a lot of those would play a part. And that's why this research really is important, because the student populations that are going to be able to get into higher education it really plays, it depends on like your GPA. It depends on being able to get those letters of recommendation because you've worked in a lab and you're available to volunteer and be an RA and have those experiences, those really rich academic experiences with having extracurricular activities and volunteering. And that really, student populations who don't have availability are impacted so much, which means that long-term, those students won't be able to get into higher education to complete master's degrees, which means that those people won't be able to do research, which means those people won't be able to ask important questions about how people need to be served and helped. And so this research really is important. We need to create that equity on student campus or university campuses so that students have those opportunities.
Thank you, Kat. My brain is having some fun right now thinking about the threads between all four of your presentations. And I think that there are some really interesting potential connections. You know, as we continue to, certainly to those of you who are joining us remotely today and watching this, please continue to feel free to ask questions. We have about 10 to 12 more minutes that we can be together here. So let me throw a question out to each of our presenters and groups today, and that is maybe a lessons learned perspective. So as you think back to this experience you've been on with this research project, what are some take-home points that you will carry with you into future research? What are some things, if you wanted to take this down the avenue of like, what challenges did you face? You could do that as well. But what are some takeaways that you will carry with you moving forward in your educational pursuits?
I was just going to jump in and say mine had an extreme irony to it in that my presentation was on time management and parenting students. And boy, that IRB application, I don't know if anybody else has experienced this in their, you know, getting human subjects training done and getting that IRB application in, but it really has, you know, a big impact on data collection. And so my, you know, being able to kind of just set these timers during my, you know, experience with research has really opened my eyes on what like to-do lists can benefit and setting due dates and reminders. And so, but yeah, I think it was just funny that my whole, you know, research project was on time management, and it really tested my time management abilities and, you know, having to juggle all of these things while completing my degree. So.
I can hop in on something that was significant for me personally. I think, you know, for a lot of our team, for the Restoring Connections team, not many of us have had a lot of experience teaching kids or sort of being involved in the education system. And so it was, for me personally, it was a really steep learning curve, but it was interesting to have this experience, like sort of understanding where holes in education are and seeing how we could fill that and like find different ways to engage students in a field that they might have no idea, you know, like anything about environmental education or outdoor education or even exploring the outdoors in a way that feels accessible to them. And so, you know, our mission was really all about having the program apply to every single type of student. And so we really had to think about how we could interact with kids who might be disenfranchised by normal school, especially in a time of COVID, in a time of Zoom when nobody's feeling like energized or really willing to participate in education. And I think it was a really great learning experience for me to sort of understand how I went through school and what I would have liked to have been different, you know, like what kinds of opportunities I wish I would have had as a student, and see if we could provide that to other kids and like have an experience where they could grow and we could grow, and it was just beneficial for everybody. So that was a pretty interesting lens to take on this program.
I think for me, the entire sort of discovery of my topic today was a huge learning process, and something that I didn't realize was even viable to study and read various pieces of literature on. So I think just the overall discovery of knowing that there are differences in things like caregiving evaluation for cultural groups, which I was able to discover through my lab that I work with on campus, was incredible to learn and to realize and to sort of find a subject that I think is really worth studying and something that I want to delve into a lot more. So the whole process was a huge learning process for me. But I think the most valuable thing for me was just the discovery of something new and something that I'm very interested in and want to learn more about.
I think for me, this journey really really taught me how to prioritize the things that are really important to me and that take up a lot of my time and effort and mental capacities, as well as some self-care in these trying times, you know, really finding that balance between work and play, you know, played a huge role in this process. And bouncing off of Kat, yes, the struggle of getting IRB approval and working through that process while also juggling, you know, a full-time workload as well as full-time school load. And really also just trying to find the time to cater to myself, my own needs, my family's needs, you know, was a challenge, but I've learned a lot about myself through that process. And I've learned that sometimes it's okay to let go of the reins a little bit and allow myself that time and that space to also just feel good and decompress. And I think that's an important lesson for everybody throughout these really odd, challenging times that we've gone through over the past year and a half.
Can I throw out another question for all of you? I mean, you're just an inspiring bunch of young researchers, and you know, so this, you know, arguably the whole U of O experience is about, you know, we're a public research university. We're trying to get students to do exactly what you are doing, and that's what, of course, this particular event is about featuring. I'm wondering if any of you could share thoughts, either sort of positively or negatively. Was there something that, now recognizing that, of course, as some of your presentations have highlighted, this year has been really weird, right? So it's not necessarily representative of what U of O does for students or how we get students into research. You know, there's been some very strange features of the period you've been doing this in, but nonetheless, either speaking to that particular context or just more generally, I wonder if anybody has any thoughts about either something that you felt like the U of O context really did for you that helped you get here to doing your own research, or something that you wish it could have done, something that would have been more supportive or helpful, either way.
If I can jump in on that, I didn't even know how to conduct research. And I think the U of O really is amazing at offering opportunities. There really are so many opportunities. And for me personally, from just the departmental psych kind of like opportunities that they put out through their Canvas page and emails, to TRIO. I don't know if anybody's you know, familiar with TRIO, but I know I'm a McNair scholar, and they offer research opportunities through that experience, and just in general, like Assure and all of the like research opportunities on campus. I personally have had a great experience with engaging in research and being able to really have other people get excited as well and have just peer support in that. So, I mean, I think just maybe letting students know when they come in as transfer students. And I think I was on a panel yesterday that spoke about this exact thing, but really hitting the ground running and doing that research and getting into those positions immediately as a transfer student coming in, because I think first years have the advantage in being introduced to that information at UO, because you know, U of O is just such a great research institution, whereas maybe some of the community colleges are more focused on like kind of prereqs and just kind of, you know, getting a good foundation before they transfer in. So I would say if anything else for UO, they're doing a great job for the students that are existing, but for transfer students, maybe partnering with community colleges and really kind of just letting students get their feet wet a little bit as they transfer in. That would be my best suggestion.
I will say that I'm a junior now, and I've been part of my same lab since freshman year. So I haven't known any sort of recent, how the UO is exposing students to research recently, just because I haven't had the desire to leave from my lab. But I will say, as a freshman, I heard a lot about the different research opportunities, but I wasn't actually sure how to pursue them. At least for me, it wasn't very clear where to go to get help. So I remember what I actually ended up doing was going to specific departments. And I think a lot of different individual departments do a really great job at providing lists. So for example, I believe the biology department, if you go into their office, they have this huge list of professors that are conducting various kinds of research, and they provide contact information and things like that. So I know for me, I sort of had to go and pursue those on my own and figure out where I wanted to be. So I don't know if it's just the way that it was my freshman year, if Assure was new or anything like that. But I know at first I was sort of like, wait, where do I go? I know that there's opportunity. I just don't know where to go or who to talk to specifically about it. So I ended up pursuing the department. So I suppose perhaps just the general, this is where you can go and this is what you need to do, may just help some wandering freshmen like myself figure out what lab they want to be part of freshman year. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, definitely. Just to write off that too, as a transfer student myself, I wasn't really aware of opportunities for research until I contacted departments directly and actually had conversations with people. But I mean, if I didn't have those conversations, I don't know if I would know those opportunities that are out there. And definitely when you are a transfer student, you're like, oh, I finally made it. I'm finally on the 4-year campus. I'm so excited. You are really excited to get your feet in the water and try new opportunities and open your eyes up to all these wonderful possibilities that the university has. But again, it's just a matter of contacting these people directly and going in those offices.
Another new development that I actually haven't personally been involved in, but I know that the UO Night Campus for Accelerating Scientific Impact, that big new building on campus, there's a whole part of it that's designed to help connect students to researchers. So even though I don't have a lot of experience with it, I think that is a really great place to go and find research since it's out there for you.
Great insights all around. Thank you. On behalf of Craig and myself, we want to definitely say thank you and offer a huge round of applause to our presenters today. Tremendous job. I know it's a long project that you've been working on. This is not something that has just come together in the last couple of weeks. We know that this takes significant time and investment on multiple levels on your part. And you've done a tremendous job. And so thank you for sharing this, and thank you for engaging in scholarship with us at the University of Oregon. I echo Craig's comments that this is really what we're about, and it's exciting, exciting to see your work. Also want to offer congratulations and thanks to those who have been with us in the audience. Thank you for if you've served as a mentor or a help to those who have presented today, we appreciate that, and we thank you for that as well. Craig, any concluding comments from you, and then we will bid you all a good rest of your symposium day.
My sole concluding thought would be to thank you, as Jesse has just done. It is such an inspiration to see undergrads reaching these levels of research and thinking critically and doing your own work. It is, like I said, exactly what we hope will happen at U of O, and it's really, really inspiring to see you getting there. So thank you for sharing your work with us for this, and I'm glad to see a bunch of participants having also profited from the session. It was really fabulous. Thanks.
Have a good rest of your day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.